They paid just $82,000 for an abandoned mansion everyone said was cursed, and when the whole town mocked them for throwing away their life savings, this elderly couple had no idea that $320 million in gold, bonds, and priceless investments sat waiting beneath their feet, hidden for nearly 40 years by a man who trusted that someday someone worthy would find it. Before we dive into the story, make sure to smash subscribe because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. The rain came down in sheets that October morning, drumming against the aluminum awning of the Timber Ridge post office, where Merle had worked for 43 years. He stood behind the counter, sorting mail with the same steady rhythm he'd maintained since 1976, hands moving automatically while his mind wandered to places far beyond the faded linoleum floors and flickering fluorescent lights. At 68 years old, Merle Garrison looked like what he was, a man who'd spent his entire life being reliable, dependable, and completely unremarkable. His flannel shirts were always pressed, his work boots always tied, and his silver hair always combed neatly to the side. He'd never missed a day of work, never called in sick, never caused trouble, and in return the world had given him exactly what he'd earned: a modest pension, a small social security check, and a cramped two-bedroom rental that smelled like mildew, no matter how many times his wife Dottie scrubbed the walls. Dottie Garrison, 66, sat in the Timber Ridge Public Library that same morning, her reading glasses perched on her nose as she restocked the romance section for what felt like the 10,000th time. She'd worked there for 37 years, helping generations of children discover their first books, guiding students through research papers, and quietly loving every minute of it. But the library was dying. Funding had dried up, hours had been cut, and Dottie, once full-time, now worked just 15 hours a week. Her hands, spotted with age and rough from years of handling books, moved slowly across the shelves. She wore a cardigan she'd owned since the 90s, sensible shoes from a thrift store, and a smile that never quite reached her eyes anymore. Because Dottie Garrison was tired, not just physically, though her knees ached and her back protested every morning. She was tired of struggling, tired of counting pennies, tired of watching her husband work himself into exhaustion for a paycheck that barely covered rent. They'd been married for 44 years, high school sweethearts from a town so small it didn't have a stoplight. They'd dreamed big once, talked about traveling, maybe buying a little house with a porch and a garden. But life had other plans. Medical bills when Merle's mother got sick, helping Dottie's sister through a divorce, raising their grandson for 3 years when their daughter couldn't. Every time they saved a little money, life took it back. And now, in their late 60s, they lived in a rental house on Maple Street with water stains on the ceiling, a landlord who never fixed anything, and neighbors who pretended not to see them. But they had each other. Every morning, Merle kissed Dottie's forehead before heading to the post office. Every evening, she had dinner waiting when he got home. They'd sit together on their sagging couch, holding hands, watching game shows, and pretending everything was fine. Pretending they weren't scared about what would happen when Merle's knees finally gave out. Pretending they didn't see the eviction notices piling up 2 doors down. Pretending they still believed in dreams. It was a Tuesday when everything changed. Dottie stopped by the coffee shop on her way home from the library, the same coffee shop where she'd been getting the same chamomile tea for 12 years. The owner, a kind woman named Patricia, always gave her the senior discount without being asked. Dottie was waiting for her tea when she saw it, a flyer pinned to the community board, half hidden behind advertisements for yard sales and lost cats. The paper was yellowed, the edges curled, like it had been there for weeks, but the words jumped out at her like a shout. Estate auction, the Whitmore Estate, 12,000 square feet, 8 acres, Saturday, October 14th, starting bid $75,000. Dottie's hand froze halfway to her purse. The Whitmore Estate. Everyone in Timber Ridge knew that name. The mansion sat on the edge of town, barely visible through overgrown trees and rusted iron gates. It had been abandoned since 1987. The year-old Cornelius Whitmore died alone in that massive house with no family, no friends, no one to claim it. The town had tried to auction it off twice before, but no one bid. People said it was cursed. Said Cornelius had been crazy. Said strange lights flickered in the windows at night and doors slammed when no one was inside. Teenagers dared each other to sneak onto the property, but most turned back before reaching the front steps. Dottie had seen the house exactly once, 30 years ago, when she'd delivered a package there for the library. She remembered the grand staircase, the stained glass windows, the hand-carved woodwork that seemed to tell stories in every curve and corner. She remembered thinking it was the most beautiful place she'd ever seen, and she remembered Cornelius, a thin man with wild white hair and suspicious eyes, taking the package without a word and shutting the door in her face. She pulled the flyer down and folded it carefully into her coat pocket. Her heart was pounding, though she couldn't say why. It was just a house, an old, broken, probably condemned house that no one wanted. But something about it called to her. That night, Merle came home to find Dottie sitting at their kitchen table, the flyer spread out in front of her like a treasure map. He set down his lunchbox and looked at her carefully. "What's this?" "An auction," she said quietly. "Saturday." Merle picked up the flyer, read it twice, then set it down. "Dottie, we can't afford a house." "We have $87,000, she said, "in the savings account. We've been putting away every spare dollar for 40 years. "That's our emergency fund," Merle said gently, "for when we can't work anymore, for medical bills." "We're already there, Merle," Dottie's voice cracked. "We're living paycheck to paycheck in a rental that's falling apart. Our landlord just raised the rent again. We can't afford to stay, and we can't afford to leave." She looked up at him, eyes wet. "I'm tired of renting. I'm tired of not having anything that's ours. Just once, before we're gone, I want to wake up in a house that belongs to us." Merle sat down slowly, his knees creaking. He looked at the flyer again. "You want to bid on the Whitmore place?" "I want to see it," she said. "That's all. Just see it." Saturday arrived cold and grey. Merle and Dottie drove their 1998 Honda Civic through town, past the closed storefronts and empty lots, out toward the edge where the pavement turned to gravel and the trees grew thick. The Whitmore estate sat at the end of a long, winding driveway, hidden behind wrought-iron gates that hung crooked on rusted hinges. Merle parked beside a dozen other cars, most of them newer, shinier, belonging to people who looked like they knew what they were doing. Dottie stepped out and stared. The mansion was even more magnificent than she remembered. 3 stories of Victorian architecture, with turrets and balconies and windows that stretched from floor to ceiling. But it was wounded. Ivy crawled up the walls like veins. Shingles were missing from the roof. The front porch sagged in the middle. Every window was either broken or boarded up. The fountain in the circular driveway was filled with stagnant water and dead leaves. It looked like something out of a Gothic novel, beautiful and haunting and utterly abandoned. "This place is a money pit," a voice said behind them. Dottie turned to see Opal Jenkins, a woman from their street who'd never missed an opportunity to remind everyone that she owned her home outright. Opal wore a designer coat and too much perfume. "You're not actually thinking of bidding, are you?" "We're just looking," Merle said quietly. Opal laughed, loud and sharp. "Good, because you two couldn't afford the property taxes on this place, let alone the repairs. This is for serious buyers, real estate investors, people with money." She walked away, still laughing. Dottie's cheeks burned. Merle squeezed her hand. "Let's go inside," he said. The auctioneer, a balding man in a suit that had seen better days, led the small crowd through the front door. The interior was breathtaking and heartbreaking all at once. The grand foyer had a chandelier hanging from a 20-foot ceiling, half its crystals missing. The marble floors were cracked but still beautiful. A massive staircase curved up to the second floor, its banister hand-carved with roses and vines. To the left, a ballroom with parquet floors. To the right, a library with floor-to-ceiling shelves, most of them still filled with books. "Property is being sold as is," the auctioneer droned. "No warranties, no guarantees. Buyer assumes all responsibility for inspection, repair, and back taxes. Starting bid is $75,000. Do I have 75? Silence. The crowd shuffled. Someone coughed. Dottie looked around at the other bidders, a man in an expensive suit checking his phone, a couple in matching designer sunglasses whispering to each other, a real estate agent she recognized from billboards around town. No one raised their hand. 75,000, the auctioneer repeated. "This is a 12,000-square-foot Victorian on 8 acres. Someone give me 75. Still nothing. Dottie felt her heart pounding. The house was falling apart, yes, but it was also magnificent. And no one was bidding. No one wanted it. Her hand went up. Merle's head snapped toward her. "Dottie!" 75,000, the auctioneer said, pointing at her. "Thank you, ma'am. Do I have 80? Opal Jenkins laughed out loud. "You're kidding." The man in the suit glanced at Dottie, then shook his head and walked out. The couple in sunglasses followed. Within 30 seconds, half the crowd had left. The auctioneer looked around, confused. "Going once at 75,000. 80, someone said. Dottie turned to see a younger man in a leather jacket, arms crossed, smirking. 80,000, the auctioneer said. "Do I have 85? Dottie's hand went up again. Merle closed his eyes. 85,000. Do I have 90? The man in the leather jacket shook his head. "Not worth it," he muttered, and left. The auctioneer looked around the nearly empty foyer. Only Dottie, Merle, Opal, and the real estate agent remained. Going once, going twice. He paused, scanning for any final bids. Nothing. Sold to the lady in the blue coat for $85,000. The silence that followed was deafening. Then Opal started laughing, a cruel, mocking sound that echoed off the high ceilings. "Oh my God! Oh my God, you actually did it! You just threw away your entire life savings on a condemned building." She turned to the real estate agent. "How long do you think before they lose it to back taxes? 6 months? 3? The agent, a woman named Vesper with perfectly styled hair, just smiled tightly. "Congratulations," she said to Dottie, though her tone suggested otherwise. "You'll need to sign the papers and arrange payment within 14 days. Dottie stood frozen, her hand still raised slightly, as if she couldn't quite believe what she'd done. Merle put his arm around her shoulders. "We should go," he said quietly. They drove home in silence. When they pulled into the driveway of their rental, their neighbor, a retired mechanic named Vincent, was outside washing his truck. He saw them and called out, "Heard you bought the Whitmore place, that true?" "Yes," Dottie said. Vincent whistled low. "That's bold, or crazy, probably both." He grinned, but it wasn't mean. "Good luck with that." Inside their small rental, Dottie sat at the kitchen table while Merle made tea. Her hands were shaking. "What did we just do?" she whispered. Merle set a mug in front of her and sat down. "We bought a house." "We bought a ruin." "We bought a home," he corrected. "Or we will. We'll fix it up, little by little." "With what money?" Dottie looked at him. "We just spent everything. We have maybe $2,000 left." "Then we'll be careful," Merle said. "I can do a lot of the work myself. Electrical, plumbing. I've been fixing things my whole life." "You're 68 years old. And you're 66, and you just outbid a room full of people half your age." Merle smiled. "If you can do that, I can fix a few walls." Dottie started to cry. Not from fear, though there was plenty of that. She cried because for the first time in decades, something was theirs, legally, officially theirs. No landlord, no rent increases, no eviction notices. Just a massive, broken, beautiful house that everyone else had given up on. Merle held her hand across the table. "We're going to be okay," he said. She wanted to believe him. The paperwork took 11 days. They signed forms until their hands cramped, answered questions about insurance and inspections, and wrote a check that emptied their savings account down to $1,843. The bank teller, a young woman who couldn't have been older than 25, looked at the amount and then at them. "You're buying the Whitmore estate?" "Yes," Merle said. She just nodded slowly and processed the check. When they left the bank, Dottie heard her whispering to another teller. The words, "those poor people," floated through the air. Moving day was a Saturday in late October. They didn't have much to move: a couch, a bed, a kitchen table, some clothes, boxes of books. Merle rented a small U-Haul truck, and they loaded it themselves. Their landlord, a perpetually annoyed man named Rick, came by to do a final inspection. "You're really doing this?" he asked, looking at the U-Haul. "Yes," Dottie said. "That place is a teardown. You know that, right? Foundation's probably shot. Roof's definitely gone. You'll be lucky if it lasts through winter." "We'll manage," Merle said. Rick shrugged. "Your funeral?" They drove through town one last time as renters, past the coffee shop and the library and the post office, where Merle had given 43 years of his life. When they turned onto the long driveway leading to the Whitmore estate, Dottie felt her stomach tighten. In daylight, with no auctioneer's patter to distract her, the house looked worse. Much worse. Shingles littered the front lawn. One of the second-floor balconies had partially collapsed. The front door hung slightly crooked. Merle parked the U-Haul and sat for a moment, hands on the wheel. "We can do this," he said, though he sounded like he was trying to convince himself. They spent the first hour just walking through, assessing the damage. The grand foyer's chandelier hung by a thread, literally. The ballroom floor had water damage in 3 corners. The kitchen was a relic from the 1950s, complete with a broken oven and a refrigerator that no longer worked. Upstairs, 12 bedrooms in various states of decay. Some had holes in the walls, others had ceilings that sagged ominously. The master bedroom had a beautiful 4-poster bed frame, but the mattress was moldy and ruined. "We'll sleep in the ballroom tonight," Dottie said. "On air mattresses." They unloaded the U-Haul as the sun began to set. Neighbors drove by slowly, staring. Opal Jenkins drove past twice, slowing down each time to get a better look, shaking her head dramatically. On her second pass, she rolled down her window. "You know the power's been shut off for 30 years, right? And the well's probably contaminated. Good luck with that." She drove off, laughing. Merle found the electrical panel in the basement. To his surprise, when he called the power company, they said they could have someone out Monday to reconnect service. The well would need testing, but there was a hand pump in the yard that still worked. They could manage. That first night, they inflated 2 air mattresses in the middle of the ballroom, surrounded by boxes and the echo of their own breathing. The house creaked and groaned around them, settling in ways that sounded almost alive. Dottie lay on her mattress, staring up at the ornate plaster ceiling medallions centered above them. "Merle?" "Yeah?" "Did we make a terrible mistake?" He was quiet for a long time. Then, "I don't know, but it's our mistake, and that counts for something." She reached across the gap between their mattresses and found his hand. They fell asleep that way, 2 people in their late 60s, lying on the floor of a crumbling ballroom, holding hands in the dark. The next morning, Sunday, they woke to sunlight streaming through the tall windows. Dust motes danced in the golden beams. Dottie got up slowly, her back aching from the air mattress, and walked to the window. From here, she could see the overgrown gardens, the collapsed gazebo, the 8 acres of property that were now, impossibly, theirs. In the distance, she could see Timber Ridge, small and sleepy and completely unaware that everything was about to change. Merle joined her at the window. "What do you want to work on first?" "The library," Dottie said immediately. "If we're going to live here, I need books around me." They spent the day clearing debris from the library. The shelves were solid oak, hand-carved, still sturdy after all these years. The books were a mix of classics, histories, and strange technical manuals. Dottie found a first edition of To Kill a Mockingbird. Merle found a collection of maps from the 1800s. At the back of the room, behind a shelf that had partially collapsed, Merle found something else. "Dottie, come look at this." She walked over. He was pointing at the wall. There was a seam, almost invisible, running from floor to ceiling. "That's not structural," Merle said. "That's a door." "A hidden door?" "Or just a closed-off room. Old houses like this, they'd seal off areas to save on heating." He pressed against the wall. It didn't budge. He ran his fingers along the seam, looking for a latch or handle. Nothing. "Maybe it's just decorative," Dottie said. "Maybe." But Merle kept staring at it. That week, Merle returned to work at the post office for his final 2 weeks. He'd already given his notice, planning to retire at the end of October. His co-workers asked about the house. Most were polite, but skeptical. One, a younger man named Travis, said outright, "You're gonna lose your shirt on that place. You know that, right?" "Maybe," Merle said, sorting mail. "Or maybe we'll surprise everyone." Travis laughed. "You're 68, man. You should be relaxing, not renovating a haunted mansion." Merle didn't respond. He just kept working. Dottie, meanwhile, threw herself into cleaning. She scrubbed floors, washed windows, and cleared out decades of accumulated debris. The more she cleaned, the more she fell in love with the house. The crown molding, the built-in cabinets, the way light fell through the stained glass windows and painted rainbows on the walls. Yes, it was broken. Yes, it needed work. But it was also beautiful in a way nothing in her life had ever been. On Thursday, the power company reconnected the electricity. When Dottie flipped the switch in the foyer and the chandelier blazed to life, at least the bulbs that still worked, she actually gasped. Light transformed everything. The house wasn't just a ruin anymore. It was a palace, wounded but proud. That night, they celebrated with take-out Chinese food, eating straight from the containers while sitting on their air mattresses in the ballroom. "We have electricity," Dottie said, grinning. "And running water," Merle added. "The well had tested clean. We're practically civilized." "Opal's going to be so disappointed," Dottie said, and they both laughed. But the laughter died when they heard it. A sound from deep in the house, a low, rhythmic thumping, coming from below. "What was that?" Dottie whispered. Merle stood up, listening. The sound came again. Thump, 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 like someone knocking on a wall from the inside. "It's just the house settling," Merle said, but his voice was tight. Thump, thump, thump. "That's not settling," Dottie said. Merle grabbed a flashlight. "Stay here." "Absolutely not," Dottie stood. "We're going together." They followed the sound to the basement stairs. The thumping grew louder as they descended. The basement was vast, with stone walls and a dirt floor in some sections. Merle swept the flashlight across the space. Old furniture, stacked boxes, a workbench covered in tools, and in the far corner the sound was loudest. They approached slowly. The wall there looked newer than the rest. Concrete blocks instead of stone. Merle pressed his ear against it. The thumping stopped. Silence. Then a different sound, a hiss like air escaping. "Merle!" Dottie grabbed his arm. "It's probably just pipes," he said. "Air in the lines." But they both knew old houses didn't have concrete block walls in the basement. Someone had built this. Someone had sealed something off, and whatever was behind it had been waiting for a very long time. They stood there in the basement, flashlight beam trembling slightly in Merle's hand, listening to the silence that followed. Whatever had been making noise had stopped, but the feeling remained, that sense of something waiting, something patient, something that had all the time in the world. Dotty shivered despite herself. "Let's go back upstairs." Merle nodded, but as they turned to leave, he noticed something. Scratched into the concrete block wall, barely visible in the flashlight beam, were numbers. 3, 14, 29, 7. "What is that?" Dotty whispered. "I don't know," Merle said, "but tomorrow we're finding out." Merle couldn't sleep that night. He lay on his air mattress in the ballroom, staring at the ceiling, those numbers burning in his mind. 3, 14, 29, 7. They meant something. They had to. People didn't scratch random numbers into concrete walls, not in basements, not in hidden corners where no one was supposed to find them. Beside him, Dotty breathed slowly, finally asleep after hours of tossing and turning. The house creaked around them, settling in its ancient bones, but Merle had stopped hearing those sounds. All he heard was that rhythmic thumping from earlier, replaying in his memory like a heartbeat. At 5 in the morning, unable to take it anymore, he got up. He dressed quietly in the dim pre-dawn light, pulled on his work boots, and grabbed the flashlight. Downstairs, he made coffee on the ancient stove they'd managed to get working, then headed to the basement. The concrete block wall looked different in the weak morning light filtering through the high basement windows, less threatening, more like what it was, a construction project from decades ago meant to seal something off. Merle ran his hand across the surface, feeling the rough texture of the blocks, the mortar between them. Whoever built this had done it quickly. The mortar was sloppy in places, uneven. This wasn't professional work. This was someone in a hurry. He examined the scratched numbers again. 3, 14, 29, 7. Could they be a date? March 14th, 2029? But that was in the future. March 14th, 1929? Possible, but why mark a date from almost a century ago? He pulled out his phone and typed the numbers into Google. Pi Day came up, March 14th, 3.14. But that still left the 29 and 7 unexplained. "You're up early." Merle turned to find Dotty standing on the basement stairs, wrapped in her bathrobe, holding a mug of coffee. "Couldn't sleep," he said. "Me neither." She came down and stood beside him, looking at the wall. "What do you think is back there?" "Only one way to find out." "You want to tear down the wall?" Merle shook his head. "Not tear down, just make an opening, small one, see what's there." They spent the morning gathering tools. Merle had brought his toolbox from the rental, but he needed more. They drove into town to the hardware store, a dusty place run by a man named Felix, who'd been there since the 70s. "Heard you bought the Whitmore place," Felix said, ringing up a sledgehammer, a pry bar, and a dust mask. "News travels fast," Dotty said. "Small town." Felix bagged their items. "You know Cornelius used to shop here. Strange old man, always buying concrete, bags and bags of it. I used to wonder what he was building out there." Merle's hand froze on his wallet. "When was this?" "Oh, late 80s, right before he died. He'd come in every few weeks, buy 10, 15 bags of concrete mix, load them into that old truck of his." Felix handed Merle his change. Never said what it was for. Cornelius wasn't much for conversation. Back at the house, Merle stood in front of the concrete wall with the sledgehammer. Dotty stood beside him, dust mask on, ready. "You sure about this?" she asked. "No," Merle said honestly, "but we're doing it anyway." The first swing of the hammer sent vibrations up his arms. The concrete cracked slightly. Second swing, a small chunk broke free. By the 10th swing, Merle was breathing hard, sweat running down his face despite the cool basement air. He stepped back, letting Dotty take a turn. She swung with surprising force, and more concrete crumbled away. They worked for 2 hours, trading off until they'd created a hole about 2 feet wide. Merle shined his flashlight through it. The beam disappeared into darkness. He couldn't see the back wall. "It's a room," he said quietly. "A big one." Dottie peered through the hole. "Can you fit through?" Merle was lean from a lifetime of physical work. He thought he could. "I'm going to try." He went feet first, sliding through the opening, feeling the rough edges of broken concrete scrape against his back. For a moment, he was stuck, and panic fluttered in his chest. Then Dottie pushed on his shoulders, and he slid through, landing hard on his feet on the other side. He stood in total darkness. The air was different here, dry, climate-controlled somehow. He turned on his flashlight and gasped. He was standing in a vault. The walls were lined with metal shelving units, the kind you'd find in a bank's safe deposit area. Rows and rows of small metal boxes, each with a number stamped on the front. In the center of the room sat a large wooden table, and on that table a stack of documents in protective plastic sleeves. "Merle?" Dottie's voice came through the hole. "What do you see?" He couldn't answer, couldn't find words. He walked slowly to the nearest shelving unit and pulled open the first box. Inside, wrapped in plastic, were stacks of paper. He pulled one out and held it under the flashlight. Bearer bonds, issued by the United States Treasury, dated 1963. Value, $10,000 each. There were at least 50 of them in this one box. His hands started shaking. He opened the next box. Gold coins. American Eagles. Dozens of them, gleaming under the flashlight beam. The next box, more bonds. The next, old stock certificates. IBM. Apple computers. Microsoft. Original issues from the 70s, 80s, 90s. "Merle!" Dottie's voice was louder now, worried. "Answer me!" He walked back to the hole in the wall, his legs feeling distant and strange. "Dottie," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "you need to come through here." "What did you find?" "Everything," he said. "We found everything." It took 10 minutes to widen the hole enough for Dottie to squeeze through. When she dropped down beside Merle and he shined the flashlight across the vault, she made a sound somewhere between a gasp and a sob. "Oh my God." They opened boxes together. Each one revealed more impossible wealth. Bearer bonds totaling millions. Rare coins worth hundreds of thousands. Stock certificates that, if they were still valid, would be worth fortunes. In the back corner, Merle found boxes of old currency. $100 bills from the 1920s and 30s, pristine and uncirculated. Dottie sank down onto the floor, her back against the wall, breathing hard. "This isn't real. This can't be real." Merle walked to the wooden table in the center of the room. The documents there were organized, methodical. He picked up the first one. It was a handwritten inventory list, dated December 1986. His hands trembled as he read, "Inventory of holdings, Cornelius J. Whitmore, bearer bonds, United States Treasury, various dates, 1960 to 1985, total face value, $47,300,000. Gold and silver coins, American Eagles, Maple Leafs, Krugerrands. Approximate weight, 2,300 ounces gold, 8,000 ounces silver. Stock certificates, original issues, IBM, 5,000 shares, Apple Computer, 10,000 shares, Microsoft, 8,000 shares, Xerox, 3,000 shares, Kodak, 4,000 shares, General Electric, 7,000 shares. The list went on for 3 pages. At the bottom, in shaky handwriting that suggested the writer was elderly or ill, one final note. Current estimated total value, based on 1986 markets, $18,300,000. Hidden December 5, 1986. God forgive me for my fear. Dottie was crying now, quiet tears running down her dusty face. 18 million in 1986. Merle, what would this be worth now? Merle's mind raced. The stock certificates alone, Apple had split multiple times since the 80s, Microsoft too. If these were valid, if they could actually be claimed, they were looking at, he couldn't even calculate it, hundreds of millions, maybe more. Beneath the inventory list was an envelope, yellowed with age, sealed with red wax, written across the front in careful script. To whoever finds this, please read. Merle's fingers shook as he broke the seal and pulled out several pages of handwritten letter. Dottie stood and moved beside him, and together, under the flashlight beam, they read, "To whoever finds this, my name is Cornelius James Whitmore. If you are reading this, then I have passed from this world, and this house, my prison and my sanctuary, has finally found a new owner. I hope you are someone worthy. I pray you are someone kind. Because what you have found is not just wealth, it is my life's work, my shame, and my final hope. I was born in 1912, in poverty so deep it left scars on my soul. I watched my mother die of a treatable illness because we couldn't afford a doctor. I saw my father break under the weight of the Great Depression, losing everything, taking his own life in 1933. I swore I would never be helpless like that, never poor, never dependent on a system that didn't care if people like us lived or died. I became an accountant, a good one. I worked for wealthy families, managing their portfolios, watching them waste fortunes on frivolous things while people starved in the streets. And I learned. I studied. I saved every penny. In 1958, I bought my first stock, IBM, 50 shares. I lived in a boarding house and ate one meal a day so I could invest. By 1965, I had enough to buy this house. Not to live in luxury, but to have a fortress, a place no one could take from me. I never married, never had children. I trusted no one. The Depression taught me that governments fail, banks collapse, and people betray. So I converted everything to bearer bonds, physical gold, paper stocks, things I could hold, things I could hide. I built this vault in 1986 when my health began to fail. I sealed it with concrete because I feared what would happen if I died and the government found it. They would take it, tax it, distribute it to people who hadn't earned it. But now, at the end, I see my mistake. I hoarded wealth out of fear, and fear made me cruel. I had enough to help thousands, and I helped no one. I could have funded hospitals, schools, libraries. I could have been the doctor my mother needed. Instead, I became a miser, counting coins in the dark. So I leave this to fate. If you found this vault, you own this house. You paid for it fairly. Whatever is in here is legally yours. I checked the laws. Bearer bonds belong to whoever possesses them. The stocks can be claimed with the proper documentation. The gold is yours by right of ownership of the property. I have only one request. Do not make my mistake. Wealth hoarded is wealth wasted. Use this to live, yes. To help your family, absolutely. But also use it to help others. Build something that matters. Be the person I was too frightened to be. The combination to the main vault door is behind you. 3, 14, 29, 7. 3.14 is pi, relevant to my work as an accountant. 29/7 was my birthday, July 29th. I spent my life calculating numbers. How fitting that numbers would be my final message. I hope you are someone good. I hope you use this better than I did. And I hope wherever I am now, I can finally find peace knowing that my fear didn't win. Cornelius Whitmore. November 1986. The letter ended there. Merle and Dottie stood in silence for a long time. The flashlight beam wavered. Somewhere above them, the house creaked. Finally, Dottie spoke, her voice barely a whisper. He died in 87. The auction papers said December 19th, 87, Merle said. He wrote this a year before. He knew he was dying, and he couldn't bring himself to give it away, even at the end. Merle set the letter down carefully. So he buried it and hoped. Hoped for what? For us, Merle said. for someone who would find it and do what he couldn't. What happens next will turn this discovery into a test of character, reveal a threat nobody expected, and remind us why sometimes the quietest lives carry the most extraordinary secrets. Stay tuned to see what happens next. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. Dottie walked slowly around the vault, her fingers trailing across the metal boxes, the organized shelves, the careful inventory. "Merle," she said quietly, "how much do you think this is actually worth? Now, I mean, in today's money?" Merle had been doing math in his head since he read the inventory. The bonds, if they're still valid, would have accumulated interest, 47 million face value in the 80s, with compounding interest over 40 years. He paused, calculating. Maybe 70, 80 million. The gold, at current prices, 2,000 ounces, that's around 4 million. The silver, maybe 200,000. And the stocks? Merle exhaled slowly. That's the big one. Apple's split 4 times since the 80s. Microsoft 3 times. If these certificates are valid, 10,000 shares of Apple from the 80s would be worth... He stopped, unable to finish. How much, Merle? Over $200 million, just the Apple alone. Dottie's knees gave out. She sat down hard on the floor, her back against the shelving unit. That's not possible. Add Microsoft, another 50 million or so. IBM, maybe 20 million. The others call it another 10 million. Merle's voice was shaking now. Dottie, we're looking at somewhere between $300 and $350 million. The number hung in the air between them, too large to comprehend, too impossible to feel real. They sat in silence in the underground vault, surrounded by a fortune that had waited nearly 40 years to be found, hidden by a man too afraid to use it, too damaged to give it away. "What do we do?" Dottie finally asked. "I don't know," Merle admitted. I don't even know where to start." They sat there for another hour, just processing, occasionally opening another box to confirm it was real, that they weren't hallucinating or dreaming. Every box revealed more wealth, old currency, rare coins, bonds and certificates meticulously organized and preserved. Cornelius had been thorough, obsessive, and ultimately desperately lonely. Finally, Merle stood. "We need to document everything, photographs, video, before we touch anything else, before we tell anyone. We need proof of exactly what was here and how we found it." "Tell anyone?" Dottie looked up at him. "Merle, we can't tell anyone about this. We'll have to eventually. To claim the stocks, to cash the bonds, there will be lawyers, accountants, the IRS." "The IRS," Dottie repeated, the reality sinking in. "They'll want half." "At least," Merle said. "Gift tax, estate tax, income tax. I don't even know what applies here." "So we'd be left with what? 150 million?" They looked at each other, and despite everything, despite the fear and shock and impossibility of it all, they started laughing. Exhausted, slightly hysterical laughter that echoed off the vault walls. They were sitting in a basement, covered in concrete dust, talking about being left with only $150 million. "We're insane," Dottie said, wiping tears from her eyes. "We've lost our minds." "Completely," Merle agreed. "But we're rich, I think. Maybe, if this is real." "It's real." Dottie touched one of the gold coins. "I'm holding it. It's real." They climbed back through the hole in the wall, back into the regular basement, and the contrast was jarring. One side of that wall, their normal world of struggle and penny pinching. The other side, a fortune beyond imagination. They stood there, dusty and exhausted, looking at each other in the dim basement light. "We can't tell anyone yet," Dottie said firmly. "Not until we understand what this means, what the legal implications are." "Agreed," Merle said. "But we need help. We need a lawyer, an accountant, people we can trust. In Timber Ridge, everyone knows everyone here. Word would spread in hours." Merle nodded slowly. "We need to go outside town, find someone who doesn't know us, someone with experience in, what would you even call this? Found treasure? Dottie suggested. Inheritance law? Estate recovery? All of it, probably. They went upstairs and sat at their folding table in what used to be the mansion's formal dining room. Merle opened his laptop, which they'd connected to a phone hotspot since the house didn't have internet yet. He started searching. Estate attorneys, tax lawyers, wealth management. Every search felt surreal. 2 days ago, they were worried about affording groceries. Now they were Googling how to manage hundreds of millions of dollars. Here, Merle said, turning the laptop to show Dottie. Sterling and Associates, estate law specialists, Portland, 2 hours away. They handle complex inheritances and property disputes. Dottie read the website. They look expensive. I think we can afford it, Merle said dryly. Assuming any of this is legal, assuming we can actually claim it. The letter said bearer bonds belong to whoever possesses them, and we own the property. Everything on the property is legally ours as part of the purchase. But the stocks? Won't the companies have records? Won't they know Cornelius owned them? Merle ran his hand through his silver hair. I don't know. That's why we need a lawyer. They spent the rest of the day in a daze. Merle went back down to the vault 3 times just to confirm it was still there, that he hadn't imagined it. Each time, the metal boxes gleamed under his flashlight, solid and real. Dottie, meanwhile, cleaned compulsively, scrubbing the kitchen until it shone, as if normal domestic tasks could somehow ground her in reality. That evening, they sat on their air mattresses in the ballroom, picking at sandwiches neither of them could really taste. We should sleep, Dottie said. We haven't slept properly in days. Can you sleep? Merle asked. After this? No, she admitted. Every time I close my eyes, I see those boxes. All that gold, those certificates. She paused. Merle, what if someone finds out? What if word gets out before we're ready? No one knows. We're the only ones who've been in the basement. Opal drives by every day. She's watching us. And Vesper, the real estate agent, she keeps calling, asking how renovations are going. They're just nosy. They don't know anything. But that night, lying in the dark, Merle couldn't shake the feeling that Dottie was right to be worried. Wealth like this didn't stay hidden. It had a gravity to it, a way of pulling people in. Cornelius had managed to keep it secret by being a hermit, by trusting no one, by dying alone in this massive house. Merle and Dottie couldn't live like that. Wouldn't. Around 2 a.m, Merle heard a sound outside. He sat up, listening. A car engine. Headlights swept across the ballroom windows, moving slowly. He got up and peered through the curtains. A dark sedan was driving slowly past the house, not stopping, just looking. Dottie, he whispered. Wake up. She stirred. What's wrong? Someone just drove by, slowly, middle of the night. Dottie got up and joined him at the window. The car had stopped at the end of the driveway, idling. They watched it sit there for a full minute. Then it reversed, drove past again, and disappeared down the road. Probably just someone turning around, Dottie said, but her voice was tight. At 2 a.m, on a dead-end road? They stood at the window for another 20 minutes, but the car didn't return. Finally, they went back to their air mattresses, but neither slept. They lay in the dark, listening to every sound, every creak, every whisper of wind against the old windows. By morning, Merle had made a decision. I'm calling that law firm today. We need professional help, and we need it now. He called Sterling and Associates at 9 a.m. sharp. A receptionist answered, professional and brisk. Sterling and Associates, how may I direct your call? I need to speak with an estate attorney, Merle said. It's urgent. Regarding? Merle hesitated. A significant inheritance, found property. I'd rather not discuss details over the phone. There was a pause. Let me connect you with Mr. Sterling. A moment later, a deep voice came on the line. This is Christopher Sterling, My receptionist says you have an urgent estate matter.
Yes, sir. My name is Merle Garrison. My wife and I recently purchased a property, and we discovered something on the grounds, something valuable. We need legal advice on how to proceed.
How valuable are we talking? Merle looked at Dottie, who was listening anxiously. Potentially several $100 million. Silence on the other end. Then, Mr. Garrison, I'm going to need you to come to my office, today, if possible, and bring documentation of whatever you found.
We can be there by noon.
I'll clear my afternoon. They drove to Portland in their old Honda, a briefcase full of photographs, the handwritten inventory list, and Cornelius's letter carefully packed beside them. Dottie kept looking in the side mirror.
Is that truck following us?
Merle glanced in the rear view. A blue pickup had been behind them for the last 20 miles, probably just going the same direction. But when they exited the highway, the truck exited too, and when they pulled into the parking garage of Sterling's office building, the truck drove slowly past, the driver's face hidden behind sunglasses.
We're being paranoid, Dottie said.
Maybe, Merle replied. Or maybe we're finally being smart. Christopher Sterling's office was on the 14th floor, all dark wood and leather chairs and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Sterling himself was in his mid-50s, graying at the temples, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. He shook their hands and gestured to chairs across from his massive desk.
All right,
he said, sitting down. Tell me everything. Merle did. He started with buying the house at auction for $82,000, the mockery from neighbors, the discovery of the concrete wall, the numbers scratched into it. He described breaking through and finding the vault. He showed Sterling the photographs on his phone, rows of metal boxes, stacks of bonds, piles of gold coins, the stock certificates. Sterling's expression didn't change, but his fingers drummed once on the desk. And you have the original letter from the previous owner. Dottie pulled it from the briefcase. Sterling read it slowly, twice. When he finished, he set it down carefully. This is extraordinary.
Is it legal?
Merle asked. Can we actually claim this? Sterling leaned back in his chair. That's complicated. Let's break it down. Bearer bonds. Yes, whoever physically possesses them owns them. They're like cash. If they're genuine and still valid, they're yours. The gold and silver, absolutely yours. It was found on your property, which you own outright. The currency, same situation. As for the stocks, he paused. That's trickier. These certificates represent ownership shares in publicly traded companies. There will be records. The companies will have documentation of who owned what shares and when. If Cornelius Whitmore never officially transferred or sold them, and if there's no record of his estate being settled, technically the shares still belong to his estate.
But he had no heirs, Dottie said. The letter says so.
Which means his estate likely went through intestate succession. The state would have claimed it eventually, but if the state never knew about these specific assets, if they were never included in probate, Sterling smiled slightly, then they're essentially abandoned property, found on land you legally own, with a written statement from the original owner giving them to whoever found them. So we can keep them? Merle asked. Possibly, probably, but you'll need authentication, professional valuation, and expert legal handling. And, he paused, you'll need to pay taxes, a lot of taxes. How much? Rough estimate? The IRS will likely treat this as found treasure, which is taxable as income at your normal rate. For amounts this large, that's 37% federal, plus state taxes. Call it 40% total. If we're talking $300 million, you're looking at $120 million in taxes. Merle felt the number hit him like a physical blow. $120 million to the IRS. More money than he'd earn in 1,000 lifetimes, and it would just be the tax bill. Sterling continued. But even after taxes, you'd be left with roughly $180 million, and I can help you structure things to minimize the burden. Trusts, charitable foundations, strategic timing of asset liquidation.
We'd need to hire you, Dottie said quietly.
Yes, Sterling said, and I won't lie to you. My fees for something this complex would be substantial, but standard in the industry, 5% of the total recovered value.
Merle did the math. 5% of $300 million, $15 million in attorney fees. He almost laughed. A month ago, $15 million would have seemed like all the money in the world. Now it was just a line item.
We need time to think, Merle said. Sterling nodded. Of course. But Mr. Garrison, Mrs. Garrison, let me be very clear. Word of this will get out. It always does. When that happens, you'll be facing opportunists, scammers, long-lost relatives you never knew existed, and possibly criminal elements. You need protection, legal and physical. You need this handled correctly from day one, because you only get one chance to do it right.
They left the office in a daze. In the parking garage, Merle started the car and just sat there, hands on the wheel. $180 million, he said quietly, after taxes and fees. That's what we'd have.
It's not real, Dottie whispered. None of this is real.
But it was, and somewhere in Timber Ridge, in a crumbling Victorian mansion, a vault full of fortune waited for them to decide what kind of people they were going to become. The drive home was quiet, both of them lost in thoughts too big to speak aloud. As they pulled off the highway and back onto the rural roads leading to Timber Ridge, Dottie finally broke the silence.
Merle, we can't tell anyone, not yet, not until Sterling handles everything legally. Agreed. I mean no one. Not our daughter, not our friends, no one. Merle nodded. The letter said Cornelius lived in fear. I understand why now. This kind of money, it changes how people see you, how they treat you.
It'll change us too, Dottie said quietly.
We have to be careful it doesn't change us into something we don't want to be.
When they pulled up to the mansion, Opal Jenkins was standing in their driveway. She had her arms crossed, a sour expression on her face. Merle's stomach dropped.
What's she doing here? They got out of the car. Opal didn't waste time on pleasantries. Where have you two been? I've been waiting for an hour. We didn't know you were coming, Dottie said carefully. Well, I'm here now. I'm organizing a neighborhood watch meeting, and I need to use your parlor. My house is too small.
Our parlor isn't ready, Merle said. The house is still a construction zone.
Opal's eyes narrowed. You've been here 2 weeks. What exactly have you been doing? Because from the outside, it looks the same as the day you bought it.
We've been working on the inside, Dottie said.
Really? Opal pushed past them and walked toward the front door. Let's see, shall we? Wait, Merle started, but Opal was already opening the door and stepping into the foyer. She looked around at the repaired chandelier, the cleaned floors, the fresh paint on the walls. Well, she said grudgingly, I suppose you've done something. She wandered toward the ballroom, and Merle's heart raced. Their air mattresses were still there, along with boxes and personal belongings scattered around. But worse, there were tools lying near the basement door, a sledgehammer, a pry bar, concrete dust on the floor. Opal's sharp eyes caught everything. Been doing demo work? Fixing some foundation issues, Merle said quickly. In the basement? She walked toward the basement door. It's not safe down there, Dottie said, her voice sharper than intended. We haven't reinforced the supports yet. Opal stopped, hand on the doorknob, and turned to look at them. Something calculating flickered across her face. You two are acting strange, stranger than usual. We're just tired, Merle said. It's been a long day. Opal studied them for another long moment, then smiled thinly. Well, I can see you're too busy for a neighborhood meeting. I'll find somewhere else. She walked toward the door, then paused. You know, Cornelius was strange too. Toward the end, paranoid. Wouldn't let anyone in the house. People said he was hiding something. She left. The door clicked shut behind her. Merle and Dottie stood frozen for a full minute. "She suspects something," Dottie finally said. "She's just nosy." "No, Merle, she knows something's off, and she's going to keep digging until she figures out what." That night, they couldn't sleep at all. Every sound made them jump. Every car that drove past made them check the windows. Around 3 a.m., Merle got up and went down to the vault. He squeezed through the hole in the wall and sat in the darkness, surrounded by fortune, feeling more trapped than free. Cornelius had written about fear, about how it had poisoned his life. And now Merle understood. This wealth wasn't a gift, it was a test, and they had to figure out how to pass it before it destroyed them the same way it had destroyed the man who'd hidden it. The next morning, Merle called Sterling. His hands shook as he dialed, and he waited through 3 rings before the attorney picked up. "Mr. Garrison, I was expecting your call." "We want to hire you," Merle said without preamble. "Whatever it takes, we need this done right." "Smart decision," Sterling replied. "I'll need you to bring me the original documents. The letter, the inventory, everything. I'll also need access to the vault to conduct a full audit and authentication process." "When?" "Today, this afternoon. I'll bring my team. We'll need to photograph everything, catalog it, begin the authentication process for the bonds and certificates. The sooner we start, the sooner we can establish legal ownership and file the necessary tax documents." Merle looked at Dottie, who nodded. "Okay, come at 2 p.m. We'll be ready." After he hung up, Dottie grabbed his arm. "Merle, once other people know, once there's a team of lawyers and accountants coming to the house, everyone in town will know something's happening." "I know. Opal will tell everyone. She'll spin it into something scandalous." "Let her," Merle said, though his stomach churned. "Sterling said we need to do this right. That means professionals, documentation. We can't hide this forever." They spent the morning cleaning the basement, widening the hole in the concrete wall into a proper doorway. Merle used a circular saw to cut through the remaining blocks, and by noon there was an opening large enough for people to walk through comfortably. They set up work lights in the vault, and in the harsh illumination, the scale of the collection became even more staggering. Dottie counted the metal boxes. 68 of them. We haven't even opened half. "Sterling's team will inventory everything," Merle said. "We just need to stay out of their way and let them work." At exactly 2 p.m., 3 vehicles pulled up the long driveway. Sterling emerged from the first, a black SUV, followed by 2 other people, a woman in her 40s carrying a large camera case, and a younger man with a tablet and scanner. The second vehicle was a van marked with a security company logo, and 2 uniformed guards stepped out. The third vehicle was unmarked, but a man in an expensive suit emerged carrying a metal briefcase. Sterling made introductions. "This is Clara Duval, our documentation specialist. Marcus Lim, our digital inventory manager. The guards are from Titanium Security, best in the state. And this is Raymond Cho, our authentication expert. He's handled everything from Renaissance art to Civil War memorabilia." Raymond shook Merle's hand with a grip that was professional but assessing. "Mr. Sterling showed me your photographs. If even half of what you've found is genuine, this is a career-defining discovery." They descended to the basement. When the team saw the vault for the first time, there was a collective intake of breath. Clara immediately began photographing, her camera clicking rapidly. Marcus started scanning documents. Raymond went straight to the nearest box of bearer bonds and carefully extracted one, holding it up to the light. 1963 Treasury bond, he murmured. $10,000 denomination. He pulled out a magnifying loupe and examined it closely. Watermark is correct. Serial number matches the pattern for this issue year. I'll need to run tests, but preliminary assessment, genuine. He spent the next hour examining bonds from different boxes, checking serial numbers against databases, verifying paper composition, studying signatures. Each time, he nodded with increasing excitement. "These are real. All of them. I've checked 20 different bonds from across the collection. Different years, different denominations. All authentic. Sterling stood with Merle and Dottie near the doorway, watching his team work. "Mr. Garrison, Mrs. Garrison, I need to ask you something important. Have you told anyone else about this discovery?" "No," Merle said. "Just you." "Good. Keep it that way until we've completed authentication and filed the appropriate legal claims. Once word gets out, and it will get out, you'll be facing significant attention. Some of it unwanted." "We understand," Dottie said. But even as she spoke, Merle heard something. Footsteps overhead. He held up his hand. "Did you hear that?" Everyone stopped. Above them, floorboards creaked. Someone was walking through the house. The security guards immediately moved to the basement stairs, hands on their weapons. Merle followed them up, heart pounding. In the parlor, they found Opal Jenkins standing by the window, peering out at the vehicles in the driveway. She spun around when she heard them. "Oh, I didn't think anyone was home. The door was unlocked, so I just—" "You walked into our house uninvited." Dottie's voice was ice. "I was just checking on you. I saw all these vehicles and got worried. Who are all these people?" Opal's eyes darted around, taking in every detail. "Is that a security company? What on earth do you need security for?" "That's none of your business," Merle said firmly. "And you need to leave, now." Opal's face flushed with indignation. "Well, I was just being neighborly, but I can see when I'm not wanted." She marched toward the door, then paused. "You know, people are talking about the lawyer visits, the strange hours you keep. Some folks are wondering if you're running some kind of operation out of here." "What kind of operation?" Dottie asked dangerously. Opal shrugged. "I'm just telling you what people are saying. Small town like Timber Ridge, secrets don't stay secret for long." She left, but her parting words hung in the air like a threat. Sterling came up from the basement. "Who was that?" "Our neighbor," Merle said, "and our biggest problem." By evening, Sterling's team had completed their preliminary assessment. They sat around Merle and Dottie's folding table in the dining room, and Raymond presented his findings. Authentication is 95% complete. Everything we've examined is genuine. The bearer bonds total $47.3 million in face value. With accumulated interest over 38 years, we're looking at approximately $82 million. The gold and silver coins, verified authentic current market value, approximately $4.6 million. The currency collection, rare bills from the 1920s and 30s, estimated value $1.2 million. He paused, and his voice dropped slightly. The stock certificates. Those are where things get complicated and extraordinary. I've verified the certificates are legitimate, original issues. Cornelius Whitmore purchased 10,000 shares of Apple Computer in 1980 for approximately $200,000. Apple has split 4-for-1 in 1987, 2-for-1 in 2000, 2-for-1 in 2005, and 7-for-1 in 2014. Those original 10,000 shares are now equivalent to 784,000 shares. At today's closing price, those shares are worth approximately $135 million. Dottie's hand found Merle's under the table and squeezed hard. Raymond continued. Microsoft, 8,000 shares purchased in 1986, with splits now equivalent to 440,000 shares. Current value, approximately $160 million. IBM, various splits and adjustments, approximately $18 million. The others combined, roughly $22 million. Sterling pulled out a calculator and tapped numbers. Total estimated value of the entire collection, $323 million. Subtract 40% for taxes, $129 million. Subtract our fee of 5%, $16 million. Your net proceeds after all expenses and obligations, approximately $178 million. The number sat there on the table between them. $178 million. Merle had worked 43 years at the post office. His total lifetime earnings, every single paycheck combined, came to maybe $1.2 million. This was 150 times that. It wasn't real. Couldn't be real. However, Sterling said, his tone shifting to serious, there are complications we need to discuss. First, claiming the stock certificates will require proving chain of ownership. We'll need to file with each company's transfer agent, provide death certificates, probate documentation, evidence that Cornelius Whitmore had no heirs, and legal proof that you acquired this as part of your property purchase. Can you do that? Merle asked. Yes, it'll take time, probably 6 to 8 months, but yes. The second complication is more concerning. I did some research on Cornelius Whitmore today. He did have one living relative at the time of his death. A second cousin named Bradford Whitmore, currently residing in Seattle. According to property records, Bradford filed a claim against Cornelius's estate in 1988, trying to inherit the house. The claim was denied because Cornelius left a will specifically excluding Bradford. So he has no claim to this, Dottie said. Legally, no, but that won't stop him from trying. When word of this discovery gets out, and it will, Bradford Whitmore will almost certainly file a lawsuit claiming he's entitled to the estate as Cornelius's last living blood relative. But we bought the house legally, Merle protested, and the contents were undiscovered at the time of sale, which makes them legally yours under finder's law and property rights. But he'll argue. He'll drag this through court. It could take years. Years? Dottie's voice rose. We're 68 and 66 years old. We don't have years. Sterling's expression softened. I'll fight for you, and we'll win. But you need to be prepared for a battle. Legal, possibly public, definitely expensive. That night, after Sterling and his team left, Merle and Dottie sat in the ballroom, too exhausted to even inflate their air mattresses. This was supposed to be simple, Dottie said. Buy a house, fix it up, have something of our own. Nothing about this is simple, Merle agreed. Maybe we should just walk away. Tell Sterling to sell everything quietly, give us enough to buy a small house somewhere else, and donate the rest to charity. Merle looked at her. Do you really want to do that? Dottie was quiet for a long moment. No, she admitted. I want to keep it. I want to use it to finally live the life we've always dreamed of. But I'm scared, Merle. Scared of what's coming. Me too. They slept fitfully that night, and the next morning brought the first real threat. Merle found it when he went outside to get the newspaper. An envelope taped to the front door. No address, no stamp, just his name handwritten across the front. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a typed message. We know what you found. Give us half and we'll leave you alone. Refuse and you'll regret it. You have 48 hours. No signature, no contact information. Just the threat. Merle brought it inside with shaking hands. Dottie read it once, then again. Who would send this? I don't know, someone who knows or suspects. Opal, or someone she told. Merle called Sterling immediately. The attorney arrived within 2 hours, bringing a private investigator with him. This is serious, Sterling said, examining the letter. You need to take this to the police. And tell them what? Merle asked. That someone's threatening us over a fortune we haven't even publicly claimed yet? Yes, exactly that. This is extortion. It's a federal crime. They went to the Timber Ridge Police Station, a small building downtown that also housed the fire department. Sheriff Dalton was a man in his 50s who'd known Merle for years. He read the letter with increasing concern. This is a credible threat. Do you have any idea who might have sent it? No, Merle said. But even as he said it, he thought of Opal's calculating eyes, the way she'd walked through their house uninvited, her parting words about secrets not staying secret. I'll open an investigation, Dalton said. In the meantime, I'm assigning a patrol car to drive by your property regularly, and I'd suggest getting that security team to stay on site. Sterling nodded. Already arranged. Titanium Security is installing cameras today and posting guards tonight. As they left the station, Merle noticed people staring. Word was spreading. By the time they got back to the house, there were 3 cars parked on the road outside their property, people sitting inside, watching. One was a news van from a Portland station. "It's starting," Dottie whispered. The security installation took all afternoon. Cameras went up at every entrance, motion sensors along the driveway, floodlights in the trees. 2 guards were stationed at the house 24/7, working in 12-hour shifts. The cost was staggering, $5,000 a day, but Sterling insisted it was necessary. That evening, Vesper, the real estate agent, called. "Merle, hi, it's Vesper. I'm hearing some interesting rumors about your property, something about discovered assets. I just want to remind you that as the listing agent, I'm entitled to a disclosure fee if anything of significant value was found on the property prior to sale." Merle hung up. She called back. He didn't answer. The next morning brought another letter. This one slipped under the door during the night, despite the security presence. 36 hours remaining. We're watching. We're waiting. Don't test us. Dalton came out personally this time, bringing the county sheriff with him. They examined the letter, dusted for prints, found nothing. "Whoever's doing this is careful," Dalton said. "And they're serious. You need to consider that someone might be desperate enough to try something violent." "We have guards," Merle said. "Guards can't be everywhere. Just be careful, both of you." That afternoon, while Merle was in the basement helping catalogue the final boxes, Dottie answered a knock at the door. A man stood there, mid-50s, expensive suit, cold smile. "Mrs. Garrison, my name is Bradford Whitmore. I believe we need to talk." Dottie's blood turned to ice. "I have nothing to say to you." "I think you do. You see, you're currently in possession of property that legally belongs to me. My cousin Cornelius was mentally incompetent when he wrote that ridiculous letter. I'm his last living relative, which means his estate, including anything found on the property, rightfully belongs to me. The property was sold legally at auction. We bought it. Everything on it is ours." Bradford's smile widened. "We'll let a court decide that. I've already filed an injunction to freeze all assets pending litigation. You won't be able to sell a single bond or claim a single share until this is resolved, and that could take years. How old are you, Mrs. Garrison? 66, 67? Think you'll live long enough to see a dime?" Merle appeared behind Dottie, having heard raised voices. "Get off our property." "Or what? You'll call the police? Go ahead. I'm not trespassing. I'm here to deliver a message. Settle with me now, 50-50 split, or spend the rest of your short lives fighting me in court. Your choice." "We'll take our chances in court," Merle said. Bradford's expression hardened. "Bad decision, very bad decision. You have no idea who you're dealing with." "And you have no idea who we are," Dottie said quietly. "We've spent our whole lives being underestimated, overlooked, dismissed. We are used to fighting for every scrap. You want to threaten us? Go ahead, but we're not backing down." Bradford studied her for a long moment, then pulled out a business card and placed it on the porch railing. "When you change your mind, call me. Offer expires in 72 hours. After that, I take everything." He walked to his car, a sleek black Mercedes, and drove away. Merle and Dottie stood on the porch, watching him disappear down the driveway. "He's the one sending the letters," Dottie said. "Probably. Or he hired someone. What do we do?" Merle picked up Bradford's card and tore it in half. "We fight." Sterling filed an emergency response to Bradford's injunction, arguing that the assets were legally acquired property, not estate inheritance. The hearing was scheduled for the following week. In the meantime, the pressure mounted from every direction. The local newspaper ran a front-page story. "Elderly couple's mansion purchase yields mysterious discovery." The article didn't name specific amounts, but it quoted sources familiar with the situation, saying the find could be worth millions. Within hours, Merle and Dottie's phones started ringing constantly. Reporters, distant relatives they hadn't heard from in decades. financial advisors offering services, a man claiming to be their cousin who needed money for medical bills, a woman saying she was Cornelius's illegitimate daughter and deserved a share, charity organizations asking for donations. They stopped answering, but the calls kept coming. The emails poured in. People showed up at the house, a documentary filmmaker wanting to tell their story, a reality TV producer pitching a show, someone claiming to be a psychic medium who could contact Cornelius's spirit. The guards turned them all away, but it was overwhelming. Merle and Dottie, who'd spent their lives invisible, were suddenly the most visible people in Timber Ridge. And they hated it. Opal stopped pretending to be friendly. She gave an interview to the newspaper claiming that Merle and Dottie were suspicious from the start and that people like them don't suddenly get lucky without something shady going on. She suggested they'd somehow known about the fortune before buying the house, that the auction had been rigged. It was all lies, but it spread. Neighbors who'd been polite became hostile. Someone spray-painted "thieves" on their mailbox. Another night, someone threw a rock through one of the second-floor windows. Dalton increased patrols, but he pulled Merle aside after the window incident. "You need to understand something. A lot of people in this town are struggling. When they hear about you sitting on hundreds of millions while they can't pay rent, it breeds resentment. Deserved or not, you're now the face of wealth inequality to them." "We haven't done anything wrong," Merle protested. "I know, but perception matters. Be careful." The 48-hour deadline from the threatening letter came and went. Nothing happened, but the tension remained, building like a storm that refused to break. 3 days later, Merle was in the vault with Raymond, verifying the last of the stock certificates, when one of the security guards shouted from upstairs, "Mr. Garrison, you need to see this." Merle ran up to find the guard pointing at the security monitors. On the screen, a dozen people were marching up the driveway carrying signs. "What is this?" "Protest," the guard said. "Started about 5 minutes ago." Merle and Dottie went outside. The protesters, mostly younger people from town, were chanting, "Share the wealth, community property, Timber Ridge deserves better." The signs read things like, "Found fortune should fund our schools," and "Greed is killing our town." Dottie felt tears sting her eyes. "We haven't even claimed the money yet. We can't share what we don't have." One of the protesters, a young woman Merle recognized as the daughter of the librarian who'd worked with Dottie, stepped forward. "Mrs. Garrison, we know you found millions, maybe hundreds of millions. Meanwhile, our library is closing. Our school can't afford textbooks. Our hospital just cut night hours. You could help. You could save this town. But you're just hoarding it all for yourselves." "That's not true," Dottie said, her voice breaking. "We want to help, but there are legal processes, taxes. It's complicated." "Sounds like an excuse," someone shouted. The protest lasted 2 hours before Dalton showed up and dispersed the crowd. But the damage was done. Merle and Dottie sat in their ballroom that night, surrounded by luxury they couldn't enjoy, feeling more trapped than they'd ever felt in their tiny rental. "Cornelius was right," Merle said quietly. "Wealth this big destroys everything it touches." "No," Dottie said firmly. "Fear destroys things. Greed destroys things. We're not Cornelius. We're not hoarding this out of paranoia. We're trying to do things legally and correctly." "But everyone thinks we're selfish." "Then we'll prove them wrong," Dottie stood. "Once this is legally ours, once we can actually access it, we'll show this town what we really are. But first, we have to survive long enough to get there." The court hearing for Bradford's injunction was scheduled for the following Monday. Sterling prepared their case, gathering documentation, witness statements, expert testimony. The night before the hearing, he called with news. "I found something. Bradford Whitmore has a criminal record, fraud, embezzlement, multiple lawsuits from business partners. And get this, he tried to contest Cornelius's will back in '88. claiming undue influence and mental incompetence. The judge threw it out and specifically noted that Cornelius had been of sound mind and had deliberately excluded Bradford due to his criminal proclivities and moral defects. "So he has no case," Merle said. "He has no good case, but he's desperate, and desperate people are dangerous. Be ready for anything tomorrow." That night, Merle couldn't sleep. He lay on his air mattress, listening to Dottie breathe beside him, thinking about the journey that had brought them here. 2 months ago, they'd been invisible, struggling, but safe in their anonymity. Now they were under siege. Legal threats, public scrutiny, family betrayal, community resentment. And for what? Money they couldn't access, wealth they couldn't enjoy, a fortune that felt more like a curse than a blessing. But then he thought about Cornelius's letter, about a man who'd let fear poison his entire life, who died alone, wealthy but miserable, surrounded by treasure he'd been too afraid to use or share. Merle didn't want that. Neither did Dottie. They'd fought for everything in their lives, fought poverty, fought illness, fought the world's indifference to people like them. This was just another fight, maybe the biggest, maybe the last, but they would fight it together. At 3 a.m., Dottie stirred and reached for his hand. "You awake?" "Yeah?" "Tomorrow, in court. No matter what Bradford says or offers, we don't settle." "You sure?" She squeezed his hand. "I'm sure. Cornelius trusted us. He wrote that letter hoping someone worthy would find his fortune. We're worthy, Merle. We've earned this through every hard year, every sacrifice, every time we chose integrity over ease. I'm not letting some criminal take that away." Merle pulled her close. "Okay then, we fight." The next morning they dressed in their best clothes. Merle wore a suit he'd bought at Goodwill 15 years ago for his mother's funeral. Dottie wore a blue dress from a yard sale. They looked exactly like what they were, working-class people in their late 60s, out of place in the marble halls of the county courthouse. Bradford arrived in a custom suit that probably cost more than their car. He had 3 lawyers with him, all carrying briefcases, all looking confident and aggressive. He saw Merle and Dottie and smirked. "Last chance to settle," he called across the hallway. 50-50, take it or lose everything." Sterling stepped between them. "Save it for the judge." The courtroom was smaller than Merle expected. The judge, a woman in her 60s named Helen Martinez, looked tired but sharp. She read through the filings quickly while everyone settled. Then she looked up. "This is an emergency hearing on the matter of Whitmore estate assets. Mr. Whitmore, your attorney may present your case." Bradford's lead lawyer, a slick man named Peterson, stood. "Your Honor, my client is the last living blood relative of Cornelius Whitmore. The recently discovered assets were part of Mr. Whitmore's estate and should have been distributed through probate. The property purchasers may own the house, but the contents, specifically the fortune hidden within, should rightfully pass to the legal heir." Judge Martinez turned to Sterling. "Response?" Sterling stood calmly. "Your Honor, Cornelius Whitmore explicitly excluded Bradford Whitmore from his will, citing his criminal history and moral character. The will was probated in 1988, and Bradford's previous challenge was denied. The assets in question were not discovered during probate, were not listed in any estate inventory, and were found by my clients as part of their legal property purchase. Under state law regarding found property and the doctrine of treasure trove, these assets belong to my clients." "Your Honor," Peterson interrupted, "the assets were deliberately hidden by the deceased, indicating intent to preserve them for his estate, not abandon them." "The deceased left a letter," Sterling countered, "explicitly stating that whoever found the assets could keep them. I have the original letter here, authenticated and notarized. It states clearly that the finder should be someone worthy and gives them full permission to claim everything." Judge Martinez held out her hand. "Let me see this letter." Sterling provided it. The judge read slowly,
her expression unreadable. When she finished, she looked at Bradford. "Mr. Whitmore, were you aware your cousin viewed you as morally defective and criminally inclined?"
Bradford's face reddened. "Your Honor, It's in the previous court record," Martinez said. "Judge Baker in '88 described you as a man of dubious ethics and established dishonesty. Your multiple fraud convictions support that assessment."
"Those charges were documented and public record," Martinez cut him off. She looked at the letter again, then at Merle and Dottie. "Mr. and Mrs. Garrison, you paid $82,000 for a property that others were afraid to bid on. Is that correct?"
"Yes, Your Honor," Merle said quietly. "And you discovered these assets during renovation work?"
"Yes, ma'am."
"Did you have any prior knowledge of their existence?"
"No, ma'am. We were as shocked as anyone."
Martinez nodded slowly, then turned to Bradford.
"Mr. Whitmore, your cousin spent the last year of his life hiding his fortune and writing a letter giving it to whoever found it. He specifically and repeatedly excluded you from his will and his life. I see no legal basis for your claim." She banged her gavel once. "Motion for injunction denied. The assets belong to the property owners. Next case." Bradford stood, shaking. "This isn't over. I'll appeal.
You'll lose," Martinez said flatly. "And if you continue to harass these people, I'll hold you in contempt. We're done here."
In the hallway outside, Sterling shook Merle's hand. "Congratulations, you won."
But Merle didn't feel victorious. He felt exhausted. Dottie leaned against him, and they stood there in the courthouse corridor. Two elderly people who'd just defended their right to a fortune they'd never asked for, surrounded by strangers and threats, and a future that felt heavier than it should.
"What now?" Dottie asked. "Now," Sterling said, "we begin the real work, claiming the assets, paying the taxes, and deciding what kind of people you want to be with all that money." Merle looked at Dottie. She looked back at him, and in that moment, they both knew. The hard part wasn't over. It was just beginning. Because winning the fortune was one thing, learning how to live with it was something else entirely.
6 months. That's how long it took for Sterling and his team to authenticate every bond, verify every stock certificate, establish legal ownership, and begin the process of converting paper into actual money. 6 months of depositions, audits, tax filings, and endless paperwork. 6 months of living in a mansion they owned but couldn't afford to properly heat. 6 months of watching their bank account hover near zero while sitting on top of $320 million they couldn't touch. Bradford appealed the judge's decision twice. Both appeals were denied. He tried filing complaints with the IRS claiming Merle and Dottie were hiding assets. Investigations came, found everything properly documented, and left. He hired a private investigator to dig up dirt on them. The investigator found 43 years of honest postal work and 37 years of library service. Nothing scandalous, nothing useful. Finally, in April, 7 months after they'd bought the house, Sterling called with the news they'd been waiting for. "The first transfer went through. The bonds are liquidated. After taxes and fees, you have $68 million in your account as of this morning." Merle sat down hard on the floor of the ballroom. $68 million. "The stock transfers will take longer. Microsoft and Apple are processing the claims now. IBM should clear next week, but the bonds are done. You're officially wealthy." After he hung up, Merle and Dottie sat together in silence for almost an hour. They'd known this was coming. They'd prepared for it, theoretically, but the reality of it, actually having that much money, actually being able to access it, felt surreal. "We should check," Dottie finally said. "Make sure it's real." Merle opened his laptop and logged into their bank account, the same small credit union account they'd had for 40 years. The balance loaded slowly. Then, $68,214,863.42. Dottie started crying. Not from joy exactly. From relief, from disbelief, from the sheer weight of a lifetime of struggle suddenly, impossibly, ending. Merle held her while she sobbed into his shoulder, and he felt his own tears coming. They'd made it. Against all odds, against all threats, against a world that had tried to take this away from them, they'd made it. But that same day brought a new challenge. A reporter from a national news network had somehow gotten their phone number. "Mr. Garrison, this is Jessica Williams from CNBC. We've confirmed through court documents that you recently came into possession of assets worth over $300 million. We'd like to interview you for a segment on—" Merle hung up. She called back. He didn't answer. Within an hour, 3 more news agencies called. By evening, there were news vans parked on the road outside their property, telephoto lenses pointed at their windows. Sterling advised them to make a statement. "If you don't control the narrative, someone else will, and it won't be the story you want told." So Merle and Dottie did something they never thought they'd do. They held a press conference. Sterling arranged it at the Timber Ridge Community Center, a neutral location with enough space for the media that had descended on their small town. When Merle and Dottie walked into the room, at least 40 reporters were waiting, cameras rolling, lights blazing. Sterling read a prepared statement first, outlining the legal discovery, the authentication process, the tax payments, $129 million to federal and state governments, the largest single tax payment in Oregon history. He emphasized that everything had been done legally, properly, and transparently. Then it was Merle's turn. He stood at the podium, hands shaking, Dottie beside him. He looked out at the cameras and the strangers and felt every one of his 68 years. "My name is Merle Garrison. This is my wife, Dottie. We're retired postal worker and librarian. We bought a house 7 months ago for $82,000. It was all we had. People laughed at us, told us we were foolish, and maybe we were, but that house contained something we never expected, a second chance." He paused, gathering his thoughts. Cornelius Whitmore spent his life afraid of losing his wealth, afraid of trusting people, afraid of living. He died alone in that big house with all that money, and it didn't bring him one moment of happiness. We don't want to make his mistake. We don't want to hoard this. We don't want to hide from our community. So we're here to tell you what we're going to do with it. Dottie stepped forward, her voice steadier than she felt. "First, we're going to take care of our immediate needs, pay off some debts, fix up the house properly, make sure our daughter and grandson are secure, but that's maybe $5 million. The rest, $170 million after taxes and fees, we're going to use to rebuild Timber Ridge." Murmurs rippled through the press corps. Someone shouted a question, but Dottie kept talking. "Our library is closing due to lack of funding. We're donating $10 million to keep it open and expand its services. Our school needs a new building and better resources. $15 million. Our hospital cut night hours. $5 million to restore full service and update equipment. Our fire department is using trucks from 1992. $2 million for new equipment." Merle took over. "We're establishing a foundation with $50 million to provide housing assistance for seniors in our county who are struggling with rent and mortgages. Another $20 million will fund college scholarships for working-class students from Timber Ridge. $10 million for small business grants to help revitalize downtown. $5 million for a community center with free programs for kids and families." The room had gone quiet. Dottie continued. "We're also paying off the mortgages of every family on our street. We're funding a food bank expansion. We're creating a medical assistance fund for people who can't afford treatment, and we're setting up trust funds for long-term community support." "Why?" someone finally asked. "Why give away so much?" Merle looked directly at the camera. "Because Cornelius Whitmore taught us what happens when you let fear control your wealth. You end up dying alone, surrounded by treasure you never used, in a house nobody wanted. We spent our whole lives invisible, overlooked, dismissed as unimportant. Now we have a chance to matter, to actually help, to show people that sometimes ordinary folks can do extraordinary things. The questions came rapid fire after that. How did you decide on these specific amounts? Will you move away from Timber Ridge? What about your own retirement? Are you worried about people taking advantage of you? Merle and Dottie answered as honestly as they could, Sterling occasionally interjecting with legal clarifications. When it was over, when the cameras finally stopped rolling and the reporters packed up their equipment, Merle and Dottie sat in Sterling's car in the parking lot, exhausted. "That was the hardest thing I've ever done," Dottie said. "Harder than finding $300 million in your basement?" Sterling asked with a slight smile. "Much harder," she said seriously. "Money we could handle. Public speaking terrified me." But the response was overwhelming. By the next morning, their press conference had gone viral. News outlets across the country picked up the story. Elderly couple gives away fortune to save hometown. Former postal worker and librarian donate $170 million to community. The wholesomeness we needed. Couple shares wealth instead of hoarding it. Social media exploded with support. Celebrities shared their story. Politicians praised them. Charitable organizations reached out asking for advice. But the response that mattered most came from Timber Ridge itself. The morning after the press conference, Merle and Dottie woke to find their driveway filled with people. Not protesters this time, well-wishers. Neighbors who'd shunned them now stood with homemade signs saying "Thank you" and "Timber Ridge loves the Garrisons." The young woman who'd led the protest months earlier stood at the front, tears streaming down her face. "Mrs. Garrison, I'm so sorry. We didn't understand. We thought—" "It's okay," Dottie said, stepping out onto the porch. "We understand. Desperation makes people act in ways they normally wouldn't." The woman shook her head. "You're saving our town. My mom's library stays open because of you. My little brother's school gets a new building. You didn't have to do any of this." "Yes, we did," Dottie said quietly. "We absolutely did." Over the following weeks, the transformation began. Construction crews arrived to break ground on the new school. The library expanded its hours immediately, hiring back laid-off staff plus 3 new positions. The hospital announced restored night services and a new wing for cardiac care. Firefighters drove their new trucks through town in a parade, horns blaring, kids running alongside. And on Maple Street, where Merle and Dottie's old rental stood, where Opal and other neighbors had once mocked them, something else happened. One by one, families received registered letters informing them their mortgages had been paid in full. 37 families freed from decades of debt in a single act of generosity. Opal Jenkins received her letter on a Tuesday. She opened it, read it 3 times, then sat down on her porch and cried. That evening, she showed up at the mansion, a pie in her hands, shame written across her face. Dottie answered the door. "I'm sorry," Opal said without preamble. "I was cruel. I was jealous. I said terrible things about you both, and you paid off my mortgage anyway. Why?" Dottie took the pie gently. "Because you're our neighbor, and because we remember what it's like to struggle. We don't hold grudges, Opal. We just want people to have a chance." Opal broke down completely. "I don't deserve this." "Maybe not," Dottie said honestly, "but grace isn't about deserving. It's about giving anyway." The 2 women stood on the porch for a long moment. Then Opal pulled Dottie into a fierce hug. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for being better than me." By summer, Timber Ridge had transformed. The downtown area, which had been dying for years, suddenly bustled with activity. The small business grants had allowed 3 new restaurants to open, a bookstore, a hardware shop, and a boutique. The community center hosted programs every evening: art classes, music lessons, coding workshops for kids, exercise programs for seniors, job training for unemployed adults. The foundation Merle and Dottie established started processing applications for housing assistance. Within 3 months, they'd helped 80 families stay in their homes or find affordable housing. The scholarship program awarded its first round of grants. 23 students from Timber Ridge, all from working-class backgrounds, all heading to college with full tuition support. But Merle and Dottie lived modestly. They fixed up the mansion, yes, new roof, updated electrical, restored the beautiful original features, but they didn't fill it with expensive furniture or hire a staff of servants. Merle drove the same Honda Civic. Dottie shopped at the same thrift stores. They ate dinner at the local diner most nights, always leaving generous tips but never making a show of it. "Why don't you buy a new car?" someone asked Merle one day at the coffee shop. "You can afford anything you want." "This one runs fine," Merle replied. "Why waste money when it could help someone who needs it?" But they did indulge in one dream: travel. In August, they took their first real vacation in 44 years of marriage, 2 weeks in Italy, staying in modest hotels, eating at local restaurants, walking ancient streets hand in hand. No luxury suites, no private jets. Just 2 people finally experiencing the world they'd always dreamed of seeing. When they returned, they found that the mansion had become something unexpected, a community landmark. School groups asked to tour it, not to see wealth, but to learn the story of Cornelius Whitmore and the lessons his life taught. Merle and Dottie opened parts of the house to the public, creating a small museum in the vault where the fortune had been hidden. They kept the brass boxes, now empty, as a reminder. They framed Cornelius's letter and hung it in the library, and they added their own inscription on a plaque beside it. "Wealth hidden is wealth wasted. Wealth shared is wealth multiplied. May those who come after us remember that we are defined not by what we have, but by what we give." 1 year after buying the mansion, Timber Ridge held a celebration. The town had been transformed. Property values had risen. Businesses were thriving. Families were stable. And at the center of it all stood an elderly couple who'd been mocked, threatened, and doubted, but who'd proven that ordinary people could do extraordinary things when given the chance. The mayor, a new mayor elected on a platform of community development, stood at the podium in the newly renovated town square and declared October 14th Garrison Day in Timber Ridge. A year ago, Merle and Dottie Garrison took a risk on a broken-down house nobody wanted. They were laughed at, called foolish, told they'd wasted their life savings. Today we stand in a town renewed, a community restored, because they had the courage to dream and the generosity to share. Let us never forget that real wealth isn't measured in bank accounts. It's measured in lives changed, families helped, and communities strengthened. Merle and Dottie stood in the crowd, uncomfortable with the attention, holding hands like they always did. When the mayor asked them to say a few words, they reluctantly came forward. Dottie spoke first, her voice soft but carrying across the square. "A year ago, we bought a house. We thought we were just getting a place to live. Instead, we got a purpose. Cornelius Whitmore spent his life afraid to trust people, afraid to share, afraid to live. His fear made him wealthy but miserable. We chose differently. We chose community over isolation, generosity over greed, and in doing so, we found something worth more than any fortune. We found meaning." Merle added, "People ask us all the time if we're worried about running out of money, if we regret giving so much away. The truth is, we still have more than we'll ever need. But more importantly, we get to watch our town thrive. We get to see kids go to college who never thought they could. We get to watch families stay in their homes. We get to witness a community remember what it means to support each other. That's worth more than anything." The crowd erupted in applause. But what Merle and Dottie would remember most wasn't the ceremony or the speeches. It was what happened after, when people lined up to thank them personally. The single mother whose mortgage they'd paid. The veteran whose medical bills they'd covered. The teenager whose scholarship meant she'd be the first in her family to attend college. the small business owner whose grant had saved his hardware store. One elderly woman, 92 years old, approached Dottie with tears in her eyes. "I've lived in Timber Ridge my whole life. I watched this town grow, thrive, then slowly die. I thought I'd see it completely gone before I passed. But you brought it back. You gave us hope again. Thank you for showing an old woman that miracles still happen." Dottie hugged her tightly. "The miracle isn't the money. It's what people do when they have a chance. You would have done the same."
"Maybe," the woman said, "but you actually did it."
That night, after the celebration ended, Merle and Dottie returned to their mansion. It was no longer a crumbling ruin. The roof was solid, the windows gleamed, the gardens had been restored. Inside, every room had been carefully renovated to honor its original beauty while making it functional and warm. They walked through the house together, as they did most evenings, remembering. This was the foyer where they'd first stood, overwhelmed by the decay. This was the ballroom where they'd slept on air mattresses, wondering if they'd made a terrible mistake. This was the library where they'd found the hidden door. This was the basement where everything changed. They descended the stairs one more time, squeezing through the enlarged doorway into the vault. It was empty now except for the museum displays. The bonds had been cashed, the stocks had been claimed, the gold had been sold. The fortune that had sat hidden for 38 years was gone, transformed from metal and paper into schools and hospitals and hope. Merle ran his hand along one of the empty brass boxes. "Do you ever wonder what Cornelius would think?" "I think he'd be relieved," Dottie said. "I think he knew at the end that he'd wasted his life, and I think he hoped someone would use his fortune better than he did." "We did," Merle said quietly. "Didn't we?" "Yes," Dottie smiled. "We really did." They climbed back upstairs, turned off the lights, and sat together in the restored parlor. Through the window, they could see Timber Ridge in the distance, lights twinkling in the darkness. A town that had been dying was now alive again, not because of money alone, but because of what money could do when coupled with compassion. "Do you miss being invisible?" Merle asked. Dottie thought about it. "Sometimes. It was simpler, quieter. But I don't regret this, any of it. Not even the threats, the protests, Bradford's lawsuits. Those were hard," she admitted, "terrifying even. But we survived, and we came out stronger." Merle squeezed her hand. "We're not spring chickens anymore. We've probably got, 10, 15 good years left if we're lucky. Maybe 20 if we're stubborn," Dottie said with a smile. "What do you want to do with them?" Dottie looked around at their beautiful, restored home. "This, exactly this. Live here, help our community, watch our grandson grow up, travel a little, love each other, and maybe, just maybe, inspire a few other people to be generous when they have the chance." "That's a good plan," Merle said. They sat in comfortable silence as the evening deepened into night. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell rang. In the mansion around them, the old house settled with familiar creaks and groans, no longer ominous but almost friendly. And in the hearts of two elderly people who'd been mocked, threatened, and tested, there was peace. 3 years later, Merle Garrison passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 71. He'd lived just long enough to see the new school open, the hospital wing completed, and the first cohort of scholarship recipients graduate from college. Dottie held his hand as he slipped away, and her last words to him were simple. "We did good, didn't we?" He'd smiled and nodded. They had. Dottie lived another 5 years after that, continuing their work, expanding the foundation, and personally greeting every scholarship recipient. When she died at 77, the entire town of Timber Ridge shut down for her funeral. Over 2,000 people attended. They came from neighboring counties, from other states, people whose lives had been touched by the Garrison Foundation. In her will, Dottie left the mansion to the town of Timber Ridge with instructions that it be maintained as a community center and museum, forever telling the story of Cornelius Whitmore's fear and the garrison's courage. She left the remainder of their fortune, carefully invested and grown over the years, to the foundation, ensuring it would continue helping families for generations. Today, if you visit Timber Ridge, you can tour the Garrison Mansion. You can see the vault where $320 million once sat hidden. You can read Cornelius's letter and the garrison's response. You can walk through rooms where two ordinary people made extraordinary choices. And on a brass plaque near the entrance, you'll find these words: Merle and Dottie Garrison, postal worker and librarian. They bought a broken mansion for $82,000 and found a fortune worth $320 million. But their real treasure wasn't what they found, it was what they gave away. May we all have their courage to dream, their strength to endure, and their generosity to share. Because anyone can find wealth if they're lucky enough. But it takes something special, something rare and beautiful, and worth more than any fortune, to find wealth and choose to use it to lift others up instead of just yourself. Timber Ridge learned that lesson. And the story of the elderly couple who was mocked for buying an abandoned mansion only to discover the biggest hidden fortune in state history became a story about something far more valuable than money. It became a story about character, about integrity, about remembering where you came from even when everything changes, about being the same kind people at 70 with $100 million that you were at 68 with $800 in the bank. The Garrisons didn't just find a fortune, they found a purpose. And in finding that purpose, they transformed not just their own lives, but an entire community. They proved that the measure of a person isn't how much they accumulate, but how much they give. That real wealth isn't counted in dollars, but in lives changed and hope restored. As the evening sun sets over the Oregon hills, over the mansion that once stood forgotten and now stands as a monument to generosity, the lesson remains clear. Wealth hoarded is wealth wasted. Wealth shared is wealth multiplied. And sometimes the people who seem most ordinary, most invisible, most easily dismissed, are exactly the ones capable of the most extraordinary grace. Merle and Dottie Garrison were laughed at for buying a broken mansion, but they had the last laugh. Not because they became rich, but because they became legends. Not through what they kept, but through what they gave away. Not by rising above their community, but by lifting their community up with them. Because at the end of the day, anyone can buy a house. But it takes something special to turn a house into a home, a fortune into hope, and mockery into meaning. The Garrisons did exactly that, and Timber Ridge will never forget. The end. Up next, two more incredible stories that will restore your faith in humanity. Click to keep discovering with us. And don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they choose compassion over greed.